The small town of Ridgewood was known for its quiet streets, friendly neighbors, and clear night skies, perfect for stargazing. Laura Myers loved this about her home. Every evening, she would climb up to the roof of her modest house with her old telescope, searching for constellations, planets, or anything that caught her eye in the vast expanse above. It was her escape from the monotony of daily life, a way to feel connected to something bigger than herself. But lately, something felt off. For weeks now, the sky had been unusually empty. No planes crisscrossed overhead during the day, no satellites blinked faintly at night. Even the International Space Station, which she often tracked as it orbited Earth, seemed to have vanished. At first, Laura thought it might be some kind of technical issue with her equipment. She cleaned the lenses, adjusted the settings, and even borrowed Jake Monroe's binoculars one evening. But no matter what she tried, the result was always the same: nothing. Jake lived next door, a retired mechanic who spent most of his days tinkering with old car parts in his garage. He wasn't much of a stargazer himself, but he enjoyed listening to Laura talk about her discoveries. When she mentioned the strange emptiness in the sky, he shrugged it off. "Probably just another government thing," he said casually, wiping grease-stained hands on a rag. "Maybe they're running tests or something." Laura wanted to believe him, but deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. The absence of activity in the sky wasn't just unusual, it was unnatural. And then, late one afternoon, something happened that neither of them could ignore. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the air around Ridgewood grew eerily still. Birds stopped chirping, leaves ceased rustling, and even the distant hum of traffic faded away. At first, Laura thought it was just another oddity in a string of strange events. But then she saw it, or rather, she didn't see it right away. A shimmer appeared on the edge of the horizon, like heat waves rising off hot pavement. Except this wasn't heat. It was something else entirely. Slowly, massive shapes began to take form in the sky. They were enormous, bigger than any airplane or satellite she'd ever seen, and their metallic surfaces gleamed faintly in the fading light. Laura froze, her breath catching in her throat. She grabbed her phone and called Jake, her voice trembling, as she told him to come outside immediately. By the time he arrived, the entire neighborhood had gathered in the street, staring upward in stunned silence. The ships hung there, motionless, casting long shadows over the rooftops. There was no sound, no sign of engines or propulsion systems. It was as if they had simply materialized out of thin air. What are those?" Jake muttered, shielding his eyes against the glare. Laura shook her head, unable to speak. Her mind raced with possibilities, none of which made sense. Were they alien? If so, why hadn't they announced themselves? Why weren't they moving? And then she noticed something that sent a chill down her spine. Markings on the sides of the ships, bold insignias that looked unmistakably human. The emblem of Earth's United Nations Space Command, UNSC. "They're ours," she whispered finally, her voice barely audible over the murmurs of the crowd. "Or at least, they're supposed to be." Jake frowned. "Ours? You mean like NASA or something?" She nodded slowly. "I don't know how or why, but these ships are human-made. Or at least, they were built by humans." The realization only deepened the mystery. If the ships belonged to humanity, why had they suddenly appeared without warning? Where had they come from? And perhaps most importantly, what did they want? As the townspeople continued to gawk, Laura felt a growing unease settle in her chest. Something about the ships felt wrong, not malevolent, exactly, but not entirely benevolent either. They loomed above Ridgewood like silent sentinels, watching, waiting. Whatever their purpose, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that her peaceful little town was about to become part of something far greater and far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The days that followed the arrival of the massive ships were unlike anything Ridgewood had ever experienced. The townspeople went about their routines, but there was an undeniable tension in the air. Conversations revolved around one topic: the silent, looming vessels above them. People gathered on street corners and in coffee shops, speculating about what the ships meant and why they were here. Some believed it was a military exercise gone awry. Others thought it might be a sign of extraterrestrial contact, even though the markings on the ships clearly pointed to human origins. A few whispered darker theories that the ships were harbingers of doom, sent to deliver humanity's final judgment. Laura Myers couldn't stop thinking about them. Every waking moment was consumed by questions she couldn't answer. She spent hours poring over old astronomy books and online forums, searching for any mention of similar events. But nothing matched what was happening in Ridgewood. The silence of the ships unnerved her more than anything else. If they were human-made, why hadn't anyone claimed responsibility? Why weren't they communicating with the people below? It didn't make sense. Jake Monroe tried to keep things light, cracking jokes whenever Laura got too lost in her thoughts. "Maybe they're just stopping by for gas," he said one morning as they sat on her porch, sipping coffee. "Or maybe they're tourists looking for the best pancake place in town." Laura managed a weak smile, but the humor did little to ease her growing anxiety. She knew Jake was trying to help, but the seriousness of the situation weighed heavily on her. The ships weren't going anywhere. They remained suspended in the sky, unmoving and unchanging, like giant metal clouds casting long shadows over the town. By the third day, strange things began happening around Ridgewood. Electronics started malfunctioning without explanation. Cell phones would randomly lose signal, only to reconnect moments later. Radios picked up bursts of static, followed by faint voices speaking in languages no one recognized. Streetlights flickered at night, creating an eerie glow that made the empty streets feel haunted. Even the weather seemed off. Temperatures fluctuated wildly, and the wind carried an unnatural chill. Then came the soldiers. At first, they appeared in small groups, wearing dark uniforms, with no insignias or identifying marks. They moved through the town with purpose, setting up equipment near the woods on the outskirts of Ridgewood. Barricades were erected along certain roads, and signs warning of restricted areas popped up overnight. No one knew who these soldiers worked for or what their mission was. When questioned, they offered only vague responses. "This is a classified operation. Return to your homes." Laura watched all of this unfold with mounting concern. She decided to confront one of the soldiers herself, hoping to get some answers. One evening, she drove to the edge of town where the barricades had been set up. A young man stood guard, his face obscured by a helmet and visor. He held a rifle slung across his chest, and his posture was rigid, almost mechanical. "Excuse me," Laura called out, keeping her distance. "Can you tell me what's going on? Why are those ships here?" The soldier turned toward her, his movements deliberate and slow. "This area is restricted," he said in a flat, emotionless voice. "You need to leave immediately." "But I live here," Laura pressed, taking a step closer. "This is my town. Don't I have a right to know what's happening?" The soldier raised a hand, signaling for her to stop. His tone hardened. "I won't repeat myself. Leave now, or we will escort you out." Something about his demeanor sent a shiver down Laura's spine. There was no warmth in his voice, no hint of humanity. It was as if he were reciting lines from a script, devoid of personal thought or feeling. Reluctantly, she backed away and returned home, frustrated and more confused than ever. That night, she shared what had happened with Jake, who listened intently while pacing back and forth in her living room. "This isn't normal," he said, finally, running a hand through his graying hair. "Soldiers showing up out of nowhere, acting like robots. Something's not right here." "I know," Laura replied, sitting on the couch with her knees pulled to her chest, "and it's getting worse. Yesterday, I heard about Henry Blakey went missing after heading out to check on his cattle near the woods. His tractor was found abandoned, engine still running. No sign of him anywhere. Jake stopped pacing and looked at her sharply. Henry's missing. Did anyone report it to the authorities? Laura shook her head. Not officially. Everyone's too scared to say anything. The soldiers are everywhere now, watching everything. People don't want to draw attention to themselves. Jake frowned, his jaw tightening. Well, someone needs to figure out what's really going on. We can't just sit here and wait for something bad to happen. Laura nodded slowly, a spark of determination igniting within her. She had always been a woman of action, someone who preferred solving problems rather than dwelling on them. And now, faced with the greatest mystery of her life, she realized she couldn't stand idly by. Whatever secrets the ships held, whatever the soldiers were hiding, she needed to uncover the truth for herself, for Jake, and for everyone in Ridgewood. Over the next few days, Laura and Jake began piecing together clues. They noticed patterns in the soldiers' movements, observing how they rotated shifts and communicated using handheld devices that emitted faint blue glows. They also paid close attention to the equipment being transported into the woods. Large crates marked with symbols neither of them recognized. It was clear that something significant was being constructed out there, hidden from prying eyes. One evening, as they sat in Jake's garage surrounded by maps and notes scribbled on scraps of paper, Laura voiced what had been weighing on her mind. What if the ships aren't here to protect us? She asked quietly, staring at the floor. What if they're testing us? Or judging us? Jake let out a low whistle. Now that's a scary thought. You think they're deciding whether we deserve to live or not? Laura shrugged, uncertainty clouding her expression. I don't know, but whatever's going on, it feels bigger than just Ridgewood. Bigger than Earth, even. Like we're part of something we don't fully understand. Jake placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We'll figure it out. Together. Whatever happens, we'll face it head on. As the two friends continued, planning their next move, the ships remained fixed in the sky above them, silent witnesses to the unfolding drama below. The townspeople grew increasingly uneasy, their fear palpable. Yet amidst the chaos and confusion, Laura felt a strange sense of resolve, for better or worse. Ridgewood was caught in the middle of something extraordinary and she intended to see it through to the end. As the days stretched on, the presence of the ships became a constant weight pressing down on Ridgewood. The townspeople tried to carry on with their lives, but it was impossible to ignore the looming giants in the sky, or the soldiers patrolling the streets. Laura Myers and Jake Monroe spent every spare moment gathering information, piecing together fragments of clues that might explain the strange events unfolding around them. But for all their efforts, the mystery only seemed to deepen. One evening, as twilight settled over the town, Laura decided it was time to take a risk. She had been watching the soldiers closely, noting how they avoided answering questions and kept civilians away from certain areas. Something important was happening near the woods, something they didn't want anyone to see. Determined to find out what it was, she convinced Jake to help her sneak past the barricades under the cover of darkness. We'll go tonight, Laura said firmly, spreading a hand-drawn map across the hood of Jake's old pickup truck. The guards change shifts at midnight. If we move quickly, we can slip through before the new crew arrives. Jake raised an eyebrow, his arms crossed over his chest. You sure about this? Those guys don't look like they're messing around. What if they catch us? They won't, Laura replied, though there was a flicker of doubt in her voice. We just need to stay quiet and stick to the tree line. Once we're inside, we'll figure out what they're hiding. Reluctantly, Jake agreed. He trusted Laura's instincts, even if he thought the plan was reckless. After gathering flashlights, binoculars, and a few tools from his garage, they set out just after midnight. The air was cool and still, the kind of night where every sound carried farther than usual. They moved cautiously along the edge of the forest, sticking close to the shadows cast by the towering pines. When they reached the first barricade, Laura held her breath and signaled for Jake to wait. She peeked around the corner, scanning the area for any sign of movement. The soldiers stationed nearby were distracted, chatting quietly among themselves. Taking advantage of the moment, Laura darted across the open space, crouching low behind a stack of crates. Jake followed close behind, his heart pounding in his chest. Once they were safely past the barricade, they pressed deeper into the woods. The further they went, the more unnatural the surroundings felt. The trees seemed thinner here, their branches twisted and bare, as if something had drained the life from them. Strange machinery hummed faintly in the distance, growing louder with each step. Finally, they emerged into a clearing and stopped dead in their tracks. Before them lay a massive trench carved into the earth, its edges jagged and uneven. Inside, rows of equipment glinted faintly in the moonlight, panels of metal, coils of wiring, and devices unlike anything they'd ever seen. It looked like some kind of weapon system, partially assembled and waiting to be activated. Soldiers moved methodically around the site, their faces illuminated by the glow of handheld tablets. In the center of it all stood a woman in a white lab coat, her expression tense as she directed the operation. Laura grabbed Jake's arm, pulling him back into the shadows. "Do you see that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. It's like they're building something big." Jake nodded grimly. "Whatever it is, it can't be good. We need to get closer." They crept along the edge of the clearing, staying hidden behind bushes and fallen logs. As they drew nearer, they could hear snippets of conversation between the workers. Most of it was technical jargon that neither Laura nor Jake understood, but one phrase caught their attention: activation sequence. "What does that mean?" Laura muttered under her breath. "Are they turning the ships on or off?" "I don't know," Jake replied, "but I have a feeling we're not gonna like it." Just then, the woman in the lab coat turned toward them, her sharp eyes scanning the trees. For a moment, Laura feared they'd been spotted. But before the woman could investigate further, another soldier approached her, handing over a tablet. She glanced at it briefly, then barked an order to the others. The team sprang into action, adjusting dials and flipping switches on the machinery. Seizing the opportunity, Laura and Jake slipped away, retreating deeper into the woods until they were far enough to speak without being overheard. Both of them were breathing heavily, adrenaline coursing through their veins. "This changes everything," Laura said finally, her mind racing. "They're not just observing us, they're preparing for something. And whatever it is, it's tied to those ships." Jake frowned, rubbing the back of his neck. "But why here? Why Ridgewood? There's nothing special about this place." "Maybe there is," Laura countered. "Think about it. This town is isolated, easy to control. If they wanted to test something or someone, it would make sense to do it somewhere quiet, where no one would notice." Jake sighed, shaking his head. "This keeps getting crazier. So what do we do now?" Laura hesitated, weighing their options. They couldn't confront the soldiers directly, it was too dangerous. But they also couldn't sit back and do nothing. Then an idea struck her. "We need to talk to that woman," she said suddenly. "The one in charge. She knows more than she's letting on. If we can get her alone, maybe we can convince her to tell us the truth." "And how exactly are we supposed to do that?" Jake asked skeptically. "We'll figure it out," Laura replied, determination hardening her voice. "For now, let's get back to town. We've seen enough to know we're running out of time." The journey back was tense, both of them constantly checking over their shoulders for signs of pursuit. When they finally returned to Laura's house, exhaustion hit them like a wave. But despite their fatigue, neither could sleep. They sat at the kitchen table, poring over notes and brainstorming ways to approach the woman in the lab coat. The next morning, Laura ventured into town to gather supplies, hoping to overhear any new developments. She found the streets eerily quiet, most residents choosing to stay indoors rather than risk crossing paths with the soldiers. At the local diner, she ran into Rachel Dawson, a nurse at the clinic, who had been helping care for Henry Blake's cattle since his disappearance. Rachel looked pale and anxious, clutching a cup of coffee with trembling hands. "Have you heard anything?" Rachel asked in a hushed tone, leaning across the table. "About Henry, I mean." Laura shook her head sadly. "Not yet, but I think he might be connected to what's going on out there." She gestured vaguely toward the woods. "Something big is happening, Rachel. Bigger than we realize." Rachel's eyes widened. "What do you mean? Do you think the soldiers took him?" "I don't know," Laura admitted, "but I'm starting to think they're involved somehow. All I can say is, be careful. Don't trust anyone wearing a uniform." Rachel nodded solemnly, clearly shaken. As Laura left the diner, she couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away. Whatever the soldiers were building, it wouldn't remain unfinished for long. And when it was complete, Ridgewood and perhaps the entire world would face consequences none of them could predict. That night, Laura and Jake made plans to return to the woods, this time with a clearer goal in mind: finding the woman in the lab coat and uncovering the truth. Though fear gnawed at the edges of their resolve, they knew they had no other choice. The ships hung silently above them, indifferent observers to the chaos below. Somewhere within their cold, metallic walls lay answers, and Laura was determined to find them, no matter the cost. The next night, Laura Myers and Jake Monroe prepared for their second trip into the woods. They knew it was risky, but the stakes were too high to turn back now. The image of the massive trench and the strange machinery haunted Laura's thoughts. She couldn't shake the feeling that whatever the soldiers were building was tied directly to the ships above, and if they didn't act soon, it might be too late. That's time. They brought more supplies: a small toolkit, a flashlight with a red filter to avoid drawing attention, and even a pocket recorder, in case they needed to document anything. Jake also insisted on bringing an old wrench he kept in his truck, claiming it could double as a weapon if things went south. "Better safe than sorry," he muttered as he tucked it into his belt. They left just after midnight, moving silently through the dark streets of Ridgewood. The town felt eerier than ever, almost like it had been abandoned. The only sounds were the distant hum of machinery from the woods and the occasional bark of a dog, startled by shadows. As they approached the barricades, Laura scanned the area carefully. The guards seemed more alert tonight, their flashlights sweeping across the trees. "Stay low," Laura whispered, pressing herself against the ground behind a cluster of bushes. Jake followed suit, his breathing shallow as they waited for the right moment to make their move. When one of the soldiers turned away to speak into a radio, they darted forward, slipping past the barricade without making a sound. Once inside the woods, they moved quickly, sticking close to the tree line. The deeper they went, the stronger the metallic hum became. It buzzed in their ears, making it hard to focus. Finally, they reached the edge of the clearing where the trench lay. This time, the scene was different. More equipment had been added, and the soldiers worked with a frantic energy, their movements sharp and deliberate. In the center of the chaos stood the woman in the white lab coat. Her name, as Laura had learned from overhearing snippets of conversation, was Dr. Emily Grant. She paced back and forth, barking orders at the workers while clutching a tablet tightly in her hands. Her face was pale, her eyes darting nervously between the machinery and the sky above. Laura nudged Jake. "That's her. We need to get closer." Jake frowned, glancing around. "How? There are soldiers everywhere." "We'll have to distract them," Laura replied, her mind racing. "Create some noise far enough away so they go investigate. Then we can slip in unnoticed." It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was all they had. Jake volunteered to create the distraction, knowing Laura would stand a better chance of getting close to Dr. Grant without being noticed. After agreeing on a signal, a sharp whistle, they separated, each taking opposite sides of the clearing. Jake crept toward a pile of crates stacked near the edge of the site. He grabbed a rock and hurled it into the distance, where it clattered loudly against a metal fence. Instantly, several soldiers turned their heads, weapons raised. They shouted to each other and began moving toward the source of the noise. Meanwhile, Laura seized the opportunity. She darted across the open space, staying low and using the machinery as cover. When she reached the trench, she spotted Dr. Grant standing alone, staring intently at her tablet. Taking a deep breath, Laura stepped out of the shadows. "Dr. Grant," she called softly, keeping her voice calm despite the pounding in her chest. The woman spun around, startled. For a moment, she looked like she might scream, but then recognition flickered in her eyes. "Who are you?" she demanded, her tone sharp. "What are you doing here?" "My name is Laura Myers. I live in Ridgewood. Please, I need to know what's going on. Those ships, what are they? Why are you building all this?" Dr. Grant hesitated, glancing over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to appear. Then she sighed, lowering her guard slightly. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "If they catch you—" "They already took Henry Blake," Laura interrupted, her voice firm. "He went missing after coming near this place." "What happened to him?" Dr. Grant's expression darkened. "Henry wandered into restricted territory. He saw too much. They detained him for his own safety, they said. But—" she trailed off, her voice trembling. "I don't think he's okay." Laura felt a chill run down her spine. "Who are they? Who's really in charge here?" Dr. Grant hesitated again, clearly torn between fear and the need to unburden herself. Finally, she spoke in a hushed tone. "This operation isn't run by any government you'd recognize. It's part of something older, something called the Architects. They were a secret organization formed decades ago, tasked with preparing humanity for survival. These ships are part of their legacy." "Survival from what?" Laura asked, her heart racing. "That's the problem," Dr. Grant replied. "No one knows for sure. The Architects believed a catastrophic event was coming, an extinction-level threat, but they never specified what it was. All we have are fragments of data, incomplete plans. These ships were supposed to evacuate key populations to colonies elsewhere in the galaxy. But something went wrong. The program was abandoned before it could be completed. So why are the ships here now?" Laura pressed. "Why have they come back?" "I don't know," Dr. Grant admitted, shaking her head. "They're not fully operational yet. We've been trying to reactivate their systems, but it's complicated. Some of the protocols are locked, and others seem to override our commands. Whatever's controlling them, it's not entirely human anymore." Laura stared at her, struggling to process what she'd just heard. "And the machinery you're building, what's its purpose?" "It's a failsafe," Dr. Grant explained, "in case the ships decide incorrectly. If they determine humanity isn't worth saving, we need a way to defend ourselves. But time is running out. Something inside those ships is waking up, and once it does, there may be no stopping it." Before Laura could respond, a shout echoed through the clearing. One of the soldiers had returned, pointing toward her position. Dr. Grant's eyes widened in panic. "You need to leave. Now." But Laura started, but Dr. Grant cut her off. "Go. I'll try to buy you some time." With that, she turned and hurried toward the nearest group of soldiers, waving her arms frantically to draw their attention. Laura didn't waste another second. She sprinted back toward the woods, weaving between trees and ducking under branches. Behind her, shouts grew louder as the soldiers realized an intruder had breached their perimeter. Bullets whizzed past, striking bark and sending splinters flying. Adrenaline surged through her veins as she pushed herself harder, her lungs burning. With every step, she found Jake waiting for her at their agreed meeting point, crouched behind a fallen log. His face was pale, and his hands gripped the wrench tightly. "Did you find out anything?" he asked urgently, as she collapsed beside him. "Yes," Laura gasped, struggling to catch her breath. "But we don't have time to talk about it. Now. We need to get out of here." Together, they ran through the forest, dodging roots and leaping over rocks. The soldiers pursued them relentlessly, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like blades. Just as they reached the edge of the woods, Jake tripped over a root, falling hard onto the ground. Laura stopped and helped him up, ignoring his protests. "We're not leaving anyone behind," she said firmly, pulling him to his feet. Finally, they burst out of the trees and onto the empty road leading back to town. The soldiers didn't follow them beyond the barricades, perhaps unwilling to risk exposure. Exhausted and shaken, Laura and Jake stumbled into Laura's house, slamming the door shut behind them. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. They simply sat on the floor, catching their breath and processing everything that had happened. When Laura finally broke the silence, her voice was steady but filled with urgency. "The ships aren't just tools," she said. "They're judges. Dr. Grant said they're deciding whether humanity deserves to survive, and if they decide against us." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Jake let out a long sigh, rubbing his temples. "So what do we do? How do we fight something like that?" Laura looked at him, determination blazing in her eyes. "We prove them wrong. Somehow, we show them that humanity is worth saving." Starting with Ridgewood, as dawn broke outside, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold, the two friends began formulating a plan. The ships loomed silently above them, their presence both ominous and inevitable. Whatever judgment awaited humanity, Laura knew they couldn't face it alone. Together, she and Jake would rally the townspeople, uncovering strengths and courage they never knew they had. Time was running out, but hope remained. The next morning, Laura Myers and Jake Monroe gathered a small group of trusted friends in Laura's living room. They knew they couldn't face what was coming alone. They needed allies. Among those present were Rachel Dawson, the nurse who had shown concern for Henry Blake, Ben Carter, a high school teacher with a knack for problem solving, and Emily Grant, the scientist who had risked her safety to share the truth about the ships. The mood in the room was tense but determined. Laura stood at the center of the group, her hands gripping the back of a chair as she spoke. "We don't have much time," she began, her voice steady despite the weight of the situation. "Those ships are judging us, deciding whether humanity deserves to survive. If we don't act now, it might already be too late." Ben leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Judging us? On what basis? Who gave them the right?" Dr. Grant stepped in, her tone calm but urgent. "The architects designed these ships decades ago as part of a contingency plan. They programmed them to assess humanity's worth based on certain criteria, but the exact details are unclear. All I know is that the systems aboard the ships are beginning to reactivate, and once they reach full capacity, their decision will be final." Rachel frowned, hugging her arms tightly around herself. "So what does that mean for us, for Ridgewood?" "It means we're being tested," Laura said firmly. "And whatever happens here could determine the fate of everyone on Earth. We need to show them that we're capable of working together, of overcoming fear and division, that we're worth saving." Jake nodded slowly, his expression grim. "But how do we do that? These things are machines, they don't think like humans. How do we even communicate with them?" "That's where you come in," Dr. Grant replied, turning to the group. "I've been studying the data from the trench site. There's a chance we can send a signal directly to the lead ship using one of their communication arrays. It won't be easy, and it's risky, but it might be our only shot at influencing their judgment." Laura turned to Jake. "You're good with electronics. Can you help us rig something up?" Jake hesitated, scratching the back of his neck. "I can try, but if we mess this up, we could make things worse." "We don't have a choice," Laura insisted. If we do nothing, we lose anyway. The group spent the rest of the day preparing. Dr. Grun provided schematics and instructions she had smuggled out of the restricted area, while Jake worked tirelessly to assemble a makeshift transmitter using parts scavenged from old radios and computers. Ben and Rachel helped gather supplies and spread the word cautiously among trusted townspeople. They didn't want to cause panic, but they needed as many people as possible to understand the gravity of the situation. As night fell, the group reconvened in Laura's garage, where Jake had set up the equipment. The transmitter looked crude, a jumble of wires and circuits, connected to a car battery, but it was functional. Dr. Grant double-checked the settings, ensuring they matched the frequency used by the ships. "This is it," Laura said, looking around at the group. "Once we activate this, there's no turning back. Are we ready?" One by one, they nodded, their faces reflecting a mix of fear and determination. Jake flipped the switch, powering up the device. A low hum filled the air as the transmitter came online. Dr. Grant took a deep breath and pressed a button on her tablet, initiating the connection. For several agonizing moments, nothing happened. Then, suddenly, the lights in the garage flickered, and a faint vibration rattled the windows. Outside, the massive ships in the sky began to shift slightly, their hulls glowing faintly as if responding to the signal. Everyone held their breath, waiting for what would come next. A burst of static erupted from the transmitter, followed by a series of images projected onto the wall. At first, the pictures were chaotic and fragmented flashes of stars, distant planets, and ruined cities. Slowly, they coalesced into coherent scenes, vast fleets of ships locked in battle, burning worlds, and desperate evacuations. The images carried a sense of urgency, of survival against overwhelming odds. Then, just as abruptly as it began, the transmission ended. In its place appeared a single phrase, written in bold, archaic English, *, prepare for ascension. *. The room fell silent as the words sank in. No one dared to speak. Finally, Ben broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "What does that mean? Ascension to where?" Dr. Grant shook her head, her face pale. "I don't know, but it doesn't sound like they're planning to save us." Laura clenched her fists, frustration bubbling inside her. "We can't give up. Whatever ascension means, we need to prove to them that humanity has value, that we deserve another chance." "How?" Rachel asked, tears welling in her eyes. "How do we fight something like this?" "We don't fight," Laura replied firmly. "We adapt. We work together. Those ships may be judging us, but maybe we can change their minds. Maybe we can show them that we're more than just numbers or calculations, that we're capable of hope, courage, and unity." Jake nodded, his usual skepticism replaced by resolve. "All right then, what's the plan?" Laura glanced at Dr. Grant, who hesitated before speaking. "There's one more thing I haven't told you. The machinery we saw in the trenches, not just a failsafe, it's a weapon, designed to neutralize the ships if they turn hostile. But it's incomplete, and activating it prematurely could trigger an attack. So we have two options," Laura summarized. "Either we convince the ships to spare us, or we destroy them before they can harm us. Either way, we need to move fast." The group agreed to split up. Jake and Dr. Grant would return to the trench site under cover of darkness to sabotage the weapon system, ensuring it couldn't be used unless absolutely necessary. Meanwhile, Laura, Ben, and Rachel would rally the townspeople, spreading a message of unity and resilience. They hoped that by demonstrating cooperation and strength, they might sway the ship's judgment in their favor. That night, as the group dispersed, the sky remained eerily silent. The ships hung motionless above Ridgewood, their metallic surfaces gleaming faintly in the moonlight. Despite the uncertainty ahead, Laura felt a flicker of hope. She believed in the people of her town, their kindness, their ingenuity. their willingness to stand together in the face of adversity. If anyone could prove humanity's worth, it was them. As she walked through the quiet streets, checking on neighbors and sharing her story, Laura realized something important. The ships may have arrived uninvited, their intentions shrouded in mystery. But they had also forced the people of Ridgewood to confront truths about themselves, to dig deep and find strengths they didn't know they possessed. Perhaps that, in itself, was a kind of ascension. By dawn, the entire town was buzzing with activity. People worked side by side, fortifying homes, organizing food supplies, and preparing for whatever might come next. Even those who had initially dismissed the ships as a hoax now joined in, driven by a shared sense of purpose. For the first time in weeks, Ridgewood felt alive, not with fear, but with determination. High above, the ships continued to watch, silent and inscrutable. Their countdown ticked steadily toward zero, though no one on the ground knew exactly when or how it would end. But Laura Myers refused to let despair take hold. She had faith in her community, in humanity itself, and she vowed to fight until the very last moment, proving to the ships and to herself that life was worth fighting for. As the sun rose over Ridgewood, painting the horizon in hues of gold and crimson, Laura stood on her porch, gazing upward at the looming vessels. Her heart was heavy with uncertainty, but her spirit burned with resolve. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for certain: humanity's story wasn't over yet. Not if she had anything to say about it.